For scaling teams, company team management can feel like the biggest constraint. You know you need people, but every person you add feels like more work, and you know you could do it better yourself. The truth is, if you don't solve for this, your business will be stuck. I'm going to show you exactly how I implement systems so your company can run without you. My name is Scott Bartnick. I'm a 2x Inc. 5000 founder, and I've helped implement systems and team management into multi-billion-dollar companies and to startups alike. Let's jump right in. Now, the first thing we need to understand is what is company team management? Really, all this is managing people and systems in a way to help your company or organization hit its goals. Now, you'll notice that I mentioned people and systems. So I'm going to show you a quick diagram and basically walk you through how I treat both of these things. So I always lead with a systems first approach. I'm going to assume if you're having team management issues that you probably aren't structuring part of your system correctly, so that way it allows you to scale. So the first thing we need to do is understand what a system really looks like, and we'll jump right in here. In a simple base for an agency or service-based business, it's really as simple as you have someone order something with you, your team does the work gets delivered, and then you want to get feedback on that order. Now, you can replace order with input or other terms, but it's just that simple. Is you want to get this whole circle and you want to get a feedback loop in. Now, what I find that most founders miss or most businesses miss is the feedback loop. And that's why it feels like you continuously do work, but it's never getting better. So you get stuck in that rat race. Now, the people side of it is the exact same way. We want to treat people like a system, and it allows them to improve and get better at their job. So if you look at here, I have basically what I call the role operating system or role-based SOP with a 360 feedback. And that's the whole circle. Because what I do is I have one document that really controls things like SOPs, ownership, goals, and why, as well as feedback. And that's going to give us that full circle. But instead of having to look at it each piece by piece, it's in one document. So that'll be one of the examples we go through. But before we get there, I want to walk through the other key things that we need to look at. Now, I mentioned some terms, standard operating procedures. One of the biggest things here is whether we're using delegation and team or we're looking more at AI and automation, you have to document the current workflow, the process, what's working. Now, one of the key mistakes I see founders make is they think that just by hiring someone, they'll come solve a problem for them. And later on in the presentation, we'll talk through W-2 versus contractor. What I find is if you don't know how to solve a problem, you either need to find a very, very good person who's already done that. So the W-2, someone who has the experience, they've done it for other companies, or you bring in a contractor to help build these standard operating procedures and the actual process. And then once you have it working, you bring in staff to run it. Now, the biggest thing is if you hire someone off the street and you don't have a good process and they don't have a good process, there's no way you're going to have that problem solved. So you have to look at what are your standard operating procedures. Can you, as the leader, as the whoever's in charge of that role, develop the work, or do you need to hire someone who develops the work? That is really key because it changes how you hire and scale and how you look at your staff. Now, there are layers to standard operating procedures. Basically, in the internal, we have a master SOP, which is just a document that links to everything. You can use this in Excel. I have a whole different video on that down below, but you want to make sure that you have one location for all your standard operating procedures. Then the key one that we're going to go over is the daily SOP. And then embedded in there is even larger, is kind of process. How does everything work together? How do pieces work? And the key is once you understand standard operating procedures, you can implement AI, automation, or bring in really good talent and have them working much quicker, first week, first month versus 3 to 6 months to 9 months, depending on some corporate industries that I've walked into. They don't expect you to be productive for 6 to 9 months, which I think is wild, but they can afford to do it. So we're talking a lot about the standard operating procedure. You can follow along by grabbing the free example down below. And this first page is the daily SOP. Now, the daily SOP really sits in the role-based operating system, and it gives everything that needs to be done for an individual basically day by day. Now, one of the key things I want to point out here is I have some document information about how we store this in our basically master database with numbers and things like that, so they're easy to reference and they don't get lost. But there are some key things that you'll also notice is job overview, why, goals. These are key understandings that should come from the job rec when you're hiring them, the expectations, and help someone be important. And this is really part of that 360 feedback loop that we'll cover more in a few minutes. But you can see right here, the goal is that they really understand what good looks like in their job and why they're doing their job. Otherwise, they really can't succeed and they can't express maybe why they need a raise in the future. Now, some key things in here that I'll quickly go over is understanding priorities when you're managing your team. So, as you assign new responsibilities, if you're their manager, everything might feel urgent to them because you've asked them to do it. So they need to understand, where does this fit in my daily task? Is this something that I need to drop everything to do, or is this get it done later? So they just need to understand how important is that in their job. Now, in the example down below, which you can get for free, it does explain kind of mission critical and different stages of priority. Then the next step here is just, what are those daily tasks? And we break that into, basically this first section here is daily responsibilities, things that happen every single day, things that happen every week, which might be a one-on-one, might be client meetings, monthly responsibilities, which could be reporting, KPI report outs, whatever that looks like for your team. And then annual, which could be your annual review, raises, different reports, filing taxes, whatever their job is. But the goal here is that they understand what their role is and they adapt it over time. Now, one of the advantages of getting better and better at this is if someone decides to leave the company, or you need to expand to 2 people in a role, to 5 people in a role, to 100 people in a role, as these get more defined, it helps your onboarding significantly. And we use this tool. Basically, we just give it to someone when they start, and then we give them mentorship to come in. Then they'll have additional responsibilities that don't quite fit into a regular schedule. Now, on top of that, you'll see here estimated time. So this is how much time we think it will take them to do the work. So that is also key to match with priorities, because you could have a really important task. So it's priority 10, number one priority. However, we only want them to spend an hour a day. So understanding that balance, because they might think maybe they're a graphic designer and they have to design graphics and they have to make clients happy. So they think, let me spend all 8 hours on there, but that doesn't leave time for fulfillment, for revisions, for whatever needs to be done. Now, I do have a sales example on the next tab, so you can read through this as you're following along and look at how I structure this. In here, you'll also notice some items that are highlighted. These are really, really important when it comes to company and team management, putting in things like your one-on-ones and your KPIs. And we build all of that into this system. This document also adds in a few other things where your employee or team member can leave notes. So you can kind of use this as an actual reporting document. And then we track their skill set in here. So it's like a skill matrix. So their skill set is a 10 out of 10 on KPI reporting. It's a 2 out of 10 on this. And it allows our leadership and our team to help mentor and build them in to the point where that they are sufficient in these skills and maybe become trainers in the future. Now, we covered this already, but really focusing on why we're doing something, what good looks like, and what that daily schedule looks like. When it comes to hiring a new person, if you can't define these items, you're probably not ready to hire it unless they come in with their own systems and they can tell you exactly what that job is. So, and that's where you kind of look at a contractor, a consultant, versus a W-2 employee. Now, one of the key things about implementing a role-based standard operating procedure, or SOPs in general, is getting team adoption. Typically, what we find is we'll roll out these documents and no one reviews them, no one's going back and forth with them, they're not true value, and a lot of time went into creating these. So few solutions here. One, make creating them as quick as possible. So typically what I do is, I'm highly dyslexic, so I don't want to write an entire document. We have a template which you can grab down below for standard operating procedures. And what I'll do is I'll do a Loom recording. I'll dictate every single step I'm doing, and then I'll put in there. And then, of course, I read it and review it, and we keep it up to date and we put in our master system. But it makes things a lot quicker for me. Now, the key to truly getting adoption, especially in this daily SOP, is building it into things that already happen. So hopefully you're doing one-on-ones with your team members, whether that's monthly, weekly, or daily, depending on their role. Typically what we do is we stagger them. So when they're a new hire, they get a lot more. And as they are getting more familiar with the role, it drops down to monthly eventually. On our team, we have this annual review section. And basically this is that 360 feedback loop. Is they're doing their monthly one-on-ones with their team. And we have a specific process behind that. However, they cannot get a raise or a promotion or potentially even move to a different part of the company without having these documents up to date. So anytime someone's up for annual raise or review, they do a presentation and they submit their updated SOP with their updated goals. Now, I've worked corporately and this is what they did, and I've worked in small businesses and this is what they should do. It doesn't have to be highly robust and filled out like this. It can be pretty streamlined, but understanding why you're doing your job, the overview of your job, because it changes, especially in startups and smaller companies, it changes over time. And then what good actually looks like. There's no way to properly reward someone for doing a good job if we can't define it. Now, this is super, super valuable as you scale your team. As you have a team of 2 to 3, you might say, oh, this doesn't matter because you're really in there and they understand the mission, the vision, the why. But once you get 10, 20, 30, 50, 150, 2,000 employees, you need to build some robust feedback loop and system that allows people to get raises, to promote them, to do a good job, but also to have clarity in the role because it'll make them more successful. Now, a few other things in here that I mentioned is with this goal tracking, we have them self-report every single month. They do their self-report, they can go over it with their manager, but then at the end of the year, they're able to show what they've done. They show versus their goals. If they've missed goals, they can document why. If they've exceeded goals, they can document why. And this adds a lot of value in just the general business and allowing them to feel like they're doing a good job. Now, as you can tell, we use this role operating system in a lot of our business. A few other items that we do is I mentioned the onboarding piece of this, how critical that is. So we have an onboarding kind of interview process. So our team will come in if they're a new hire and it'll tell them who they need to talk to. As you get bigger and bigger, they need to understand who to go to for certain things, whether they have IT, HR, their manager. We also do mentors for every employee. So this helps with our org structure. And I'll show you that next is basically as you grow and you have a team past 5, it becomes harder and harder to do your job. So that's when, if you don't want to add a whole bunch of middle management, which especially a smaller company, maybe you have 100 employees, you don't need 30 middle managers. That doesn't make sense. But what you need is mentors and leads in their role. So maybe you have a manager and they have 10 reports, but in those 10 reports, 3 of them are senior in their role. So they kind of feed up in a traditional org structure, but they're just leads in that role. And a lot of the way you can manage that is understanding what their skill set is in a specific thing. So again, looking at examples, maybe you have certain people that are their skill set is a 10 out of 10 in sales calls, and then they can be a trainer in sales calls or whichever process. The last tab here is just what tools and access they need, making sure that they can start and be productive in day one. Now, one of the key things that I like to point out is when we're talking about company team management, it's really delegating through systems. So everyone first goes to people, and that relationship with your team is so critical. But if you put in good systems, it's more methodical where you have really good decisions. And as you have these managers build up and have a lot of experience, this will become second nature and it won't feel like a check mark. One of the biggest things is we don't want this to feel like a checkbox. The only thing in this system that is a checkbox for my team is really their annual reviews and their monthly one-on-ones. They have to do that, but it helps get the conversation started and gives the opportunity for this system to really work. And that's how we enforce the standard operating procedures and allows the company to truly grow. Typically, when I come into businesses and help consult and build out systems and their team management, what I find is it's not usually a people problem. It's usually that they don't have the systems in place to allow their team to scale. They get too many constraints, too many priorities, not the right management of time, and not a good feedback cycle. So that's why I've designed the role operating system to really help companies implement and scale their team and become more efficient. So while they thought they might need 5 new hires, a lot of times once we implement these systems, they realize they don't need any hires and that they can just focus on developing the skills and the team that they already have. If you like information like this and you feel like you might be the constraint in your business, check out the Founder Systems AI course and community down below. And of course, all those SOPs and examples I went over, you can grab those down below for free and make sure to subscribe. Thank you.